Monica Harris stepped out of her car, adjusting the strap of her leather portfolio as the Georgia sun bore down. Riverside High stood before her, its grand brick facade exuding an air of tradition and authority. At 32, Monica was no stranger to challenging environments, but there was something uniquely intimidating about this place. She inhaled deeply. "You've got this," she whispered, the words a quiet mantra that steadied her resolve. Her dark brown eyes scanned the entrance, where a steady trickle of teachers and students passed by, their gazes momentarily landing on her before shifting away. With her natural hair styled in neat twists and a bright yellow dress that defied the muted palette around her, Monica knew she stood out. The heavy wooden doors creaked as she pushed them open, and she stepped into the cool, echoing halls. The distant sound of lockers clattering and voices mingling told her school life was in full swing. She was lost in the steady hum of activity when a voice called out behind her. "You must be Mrs. Harris," it said, tone clipped and formal. Turning, Monica saw a tall, thin man in a well-tailored gray suit. His pale blue eyes scrutinized her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "This must be Principal Greer." "Yes," Monica replied, extending her hand with a practiced smile. "It's nice to meet you in person, Principal Greer." The handshake was brief, barely more than a brush of fingers. His smile was strained, lips pulled tight as he spoke. "The board was adamant about filling this position quickly," he said, his eyes flicking over her in an assessing glance. "I trust you'll find Riverside to be different from the city." "Where did you say you were from again?" "Atlanta," Monica answered, maintaining her composure. "But I've taught in various districts." Greer murmured, as though tasting something sour. "Well, I hope you'll be able to adapt. We have traditions here, Mrs. Harris. Traditions that have served this school well for generations." Monica's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I look forward to learning about them." "Good," Greer said, turning on his heel and striding down the hall. Monica followed, noting the glances from other teachers, the quick shifts of their eyes as if afraid to linger. The air felt thick with unspoken rules, and for a moment, Monica wondered what she had gotten herself into. The first week passed in a blur of introductions, classroom preparations, and initial lessons. Monica's classroom was a sunlit space, the walls freshly decorated with colorful posters depicting famous Black scholars and authors. It contrasted sharply with the rest of the school, which clung to its beige walls and outdated displays. In the teacher's lounge, Monica felt the weight of eyes on her whenever she entered. Conversations dimmed slightly before resuming, and though some teachers smiled politely, others avoided her altogether. Sarah Blake, an English teacher with kind eyes and a welcoming demeanor, was the first to approach her. "Hey, Monica, right?" Sarah said, sliding into the seat next to her during lunch. "I'm Sarah. I teach English down the hall." "Yes, nice to meet you." Monica's smile felt genuine for the first time that day. "You're brave," Sarah continued, glancing around before leaning in slightly. Well, he doesn't take kindly to change, especially not when it comes from someone new." "I'm getting that impression," Monica admitted, her voice soft but resolute. "But I'm not here to stir the pot. I'm here to teach." Sarah nodded. "I know. Just watch your back, okay?" Greer's had a hand in pushing more than a few good teachers out. The words stayed with Monica long after the lunch bell rang, echoing as she walked back to her classroom. By Friday, Monica had started to notice which students seemed comfortable in her class and which hung back, their gazes wary. One boy, Jamal, sat in the back corner, always silent but observant. His essays, however, were sharp, brimming with insight that belied his quiet nature. After class, Monica called him over. "Jamal, can I talk to you for a second?" He shifted on his feet, eyes downcast. "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to tell you I really enjoyed reading your essay on To Kill a Mockingbird," she said. "You have a unique perspective." Jamal's eyes flicked up briefly, surprise breaking through his guarded expression. "Thank you, ma'am. Why don't you speak up more in class? I think your classmates would benefit from hearing what you have to say." He shrugged, mumbling, "It's just easier not to." Monica's chest tightened. She glanced out at the hallway, where students passed in groups, laughter mingling with snatches of conversation. Jamal, she realized, was not just fighting to be heard in her classroom, he was fighting to belong in the world outside it. "Sometimes it's easier," she said gently, "but it's not always better." He met her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, before he nodded and left. Monica stood at her window, watching as he blended into the sea of students, his head bowed. On Monday morning, Monica arrived to find a memo on her desk, a thinly veiled critique from Greer about her non-traditional approach to teaching. The note bristled with coded language about maintaining standards and upholding Riverside's values. Sarah found her in the lounge that afternoon, eyes flicking to the folded paper in Monica's hand. "You got one, didn't you?" she asked. Monica's silence was answer enough. Sarah sighed. "He's testing you. It'll get worse before it gets better." Monica's mind raced with memories of past jobs, of classrooms in Atlanta where she had faced skepticism and outright bias. But something about Greer felt more insidious. He didn't just enforce rules, he thrived on their rigidity, bending them only to suit his needs. "I'm not going anywhere," Monica said, the determination in her voice making Sarah smile, albeit grimly. "Good," Sarah replied. "We need more people like you." The weekend offered Monica a brief reprieve from the escalating tension at Riverside High. She and Elijah spent Saturday afternoon unpacking the last of their boxes, turning their modest house into a home. It was a relief to see Elijah's smile, a rare break from the stern, thoughtful expression he had adopted since starting his new role as the town's first black police captain. "How's your week been, really?" Elijah asked, his voice warm as he passed her a mug of coffee. Monica took a sip, savoring the bitter comfort. "It's an adjustment," she admitted, eyes meeting his. "Greer isn't exactly welcoming, and the staff, well, they're trying, but it's clear who's in charge." Elijah's brow furrowed, his protective instincts flickering to life. "I could stop by the school, make my presence known." "No." Monica reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "The last thing we need is for them to think I'm hiding behind you. I need to handle this." He nodded, though the tension in his jaw didn't soften. "Just promise me you'll let me know if it gets worse." "Promise," she said, giving him a small smile. As they sat in silence, the early evening sunlight bathed their living room in a soft golden glow. For a moment, Monica felt anchored, the tumult of the school week forgotten. Monday morning came too quickly, bringing with it a staff meeting that set Monica's nerves on edge. Principal Greer stood at the front of the library, his posture rigid, voice cold as he discussed the school's upcoming initiatives. His gaze swept the room, briefly locking onto Monica before continuing as if she weren't worth his attention. "As you all know, our traditional curriculum has set high standards for Riverside," Greer said, "and I expect all faculty to adhere to these proven methods." Monica felt Sarah shift uncomfortably beside her. The coded warning wasn't lost on anyone. "Yes, Mrs. Harris?" Greer's sudden acknowledgement startled her. Monica realized she had raised her hand, the instinct to speak up too strong to suppress. "Principal Greer, I was wondering if we could integrate some additional literature that reflects a broader range of voices," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the room's attention. "I've seen firsthand how students engage more deeply when they see themselves in the material." The room went silent. Greer's eyes narrowed, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. But as I mentioned, our curriculum has been carefully curated. We'll stick with what has worked for generations." The dismissal was clear, but Monica nodded, refusing to let her disappointment show. Sarah shot her a sympathetic glance, her expression saying what words couldn't. In the days that followed, Monica's resolve was tested further. Her classrooms were routinely interrupted by surprise inspections. Greer's critiques were relentless, from the arrangement of her desks to the way she interacted with students. One afternoon, as she stood in her empty classroom grading papers, Janet Williams, a former teacher who had quietly returned as a substitute, entered. Monica looked up, surprised. "I heard what you said in the meeting," Janet began without preamble, her voice low. "It was brave. I tried to push for change years ago." Monica set her pen down, curiosity piqued. And? They made it clear who held the power, Janet said, her eyes dark with memory. Be careful. Greer has his ways, and they're not always above board. A chill ran down Monica's spine. Why come back if it was so bad? Janet's expression softened. Because change doesn't happen overnight, and sometimes you have to be here to push it along, even if it's in small ways. Monica nodded, the shared understanding forging an unspoken bond between them. Elijah sensed the change in Monica before she even said a word. She had always been composed, a woman whose resolve could weather storms, but now her smiles seemed thinner, her laughter less frequent. It wasn't until one night, as they shared a quiet dinner, that he broached the subject. You know, some of the officers at the station mentioned Greer, he said casually, watching her reaction. Monica's fork paused mid-air. Oh, what did they say? That he's a piece of work, Elijah continued, his tone light but eyes serious. He's got connections that run deep, especially with the old families here. Monica set her fork down, exhaling. He's more than just difficult, Elijah. He's obstructive. Intimidating, even. A muscle in Elijah's jaw twitched. Has he crossed a line? Not one I can't handle, she said, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Elijah's stare was unwavering, but he nodded, respecting her decision. Just remember, you're not alone, he said. Always, she whispered, taking his hand and feeling a flicker of strength return. The following week, Monica faced Greer's latest attempt to undermine her, an unexpected evaluation. He walked in unannounced during her advanced literature class, clipboard in hand, and a smirk that made her skin crawl. The students sensed the tension, their usual chatter dying as they glanced between their teacher and the principal. Monica took a deep breath and continued the lesson, her voice calm, eyes steady. Now, can anyone tell me how the themes of justice and morality are represented differently in To Kill a Mockingbird compared to the essays we've discussed by James Baldwin? She asked, turning the question over to the class. A few hands shot up, Jamal's included. Monica nodded at him, the silent encouragement enough to coax him into speaking. Baldwin talks about justice as something that's always out of reach for some people, he said, whereas in the novel, justice is something that's fought for, even if it's not always won. Excellent point, Jamal, Monica said, pride warming her voice. Greer's pen scratched across his clipboard, and Monica forced herself not to look. The rest of the lesson passed with a taut energy, but Monica didn't falter. When Greer finally left, his footsteps receding down the hall, the class let out a collective breath. Good job today, Monica told the students as the bell rang. Her eyes lingered on Jamal, who offered a rare, tentative smile. Monica found a note in her mailbox after school. It was another observation report, but this one was harsher, accusing her of disruptive teaching methods and lack of adherence to administrative guidelines. Her hands trembled as she read it. Hey, Sarah said, approaching with her usual soft smile. You okay? Monica handed her the paper, not trusting herself to speak. Sarah's eyes scanned the report, and her expression turned stormy. This is outrageous. He's trying to build a case against you. Monica nodded. I know, but he won't win. Sarah's gaze softened, admiration mixing with concern. Then let's make sure of that, she said. You're not the only one who's had enough. Monica looked around the teacher's lounge, where heads were down, whispers muted by fear. But for the first time, she saw a shift. A subtle change in the way a few of the staff looked back at her, determination glinting in their eyes. And that was enough. The following morning brought a hint of unease. Monica was preparing her lesson plan when Dr. Chin, a senior member of the school board known for his reserved manner, knocked on her classroom door. His presence was surprising. Board members rarely visited without prior notice. Mrs. Harris, he said, stepping inside with a glance over his shoulder. I hope I'm not interrupting. Monica set down her notes, masking her surprise with a polite smile. Not at all, Dr. Chin. How can I help you? Doctor? Chin's gaze swept over her classroom, lingering on the colorful posters and student projects that made the space feel alive. He nodded approvingly. I've been hearing some things, he began cautiously, about Principal Greer's handling of certain staff members. Monica's heartbeat quickened. I see. I'm not here officially, he clarified. But there are whispers that have reached the board, particularly concerning administrative behavior. You should know that not everyone is blind to what's happening. Relief mixed with caution. Thank you for telling me, Monica said. But what does that mean for me? Doctor, Chin sighed, the lines on his face deepening. It means be careful. Greer's power runs deeper than just this school. But it also means that change might be coming if there's enough reason for the board to act. Monica watched as he left, a mix of hope and fear twisting inside her. Change was possible, but at what cost? The days turned into weeks, and Monica's resolve was tested daily. Greer's interruptions became more invasive. He would appear in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as he watched her teach. His presence felt like a storm cloud, oppressive and foreboding. One afternoon, Greer entered just as Monica was wrapping up an interactive literature exercise. The students fell silent, eyes darting between their teacher and the principal. Monica kept her composure. Class, don't forget your reading for tomorrow, she said, her voice unwavering. You're dismissed. Greer stayed until the last student left, then stepped further inside. Mrs. Harris, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, your unconventional methods are becoming a distraction. Monica met his gaze head-on. My students' engagement has improved, and their test scores reflect that. Test scores aren't everything, Greer replied coldly. This is a school built on tradition. If you can't adapt, perhaps it's time to reconsider your position. The unspoken threat hung in the air, pressing against her like a weight. But Monica stood tall. I'm here to teach, Mr. Greer, and I intend to keep doing just that. Greer's eyes narrowed to slits. We'll see about that. Word of Greer's latest confrontation spread through the faculty. Sarah found Monica during lunch, her expression fierce. That man is out of control, Sarah said, voice low but urgent. Monica, we need to do something. You can't be the only one standing up to him. Monica glanced around the lounge, noticing how others were glancing their way, some with sympathy, others with fear. Janet approached, folding her arms. If you're thinking of taking action, I'm in, she said. I've seen too many good teachers get pushed out because of him. Sarah nodded, eyes brightening with resolve. We need to gather as much evidence as we can. Documentation, witness statements. Anything that proves Greer's behavior is more than just tough administration. Monica felt a flicker of hope ignite. For the first time, she wasn't alone. That evening, Monica sat at her kitchen table, papers spread before her. Elijah entered the room, his uniform still crisp from a long shift. Long day? He asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, exhaustion evident in her eyes. I've decided to report Greer formally. I can't keep letting him bully me and everyone else. Elijah's expression shifted to one of quiet pride. I'm with you, he said. Whatever you need. Monica felt tears sting her eyes but blinked them back. I need to be strong enough for this, Elijah. Because if this fails, it won't, he interrupted, squeezing her shoulder. You're not alone in this. For the first time that week, Monica allowed herself to believe him. The next week brought a subtle shift. Sarah, Janet, and a few other teachers, who had long kept their heads down, began to voice their support for Monica during faculty meetings. Greer, noticing the change, tightened his grip on the school. Spontaneous classroom inspections became the norm, and Monica's teaching methods were scrutinized more harshly than ever. Mrs. Harris, we need to have a word, Greer said one afternoon, appearing at her classroom door just as the final bell rang. His eyes were cold, calculating. Monica followed him to his office, where he closed the door a little too firmly. I've heard you've been talking with other faculty members, he said, leaning across his desk. I'd caution you to be careful. Gossip can be dangerous. It's not gossip if it's the truth, Monica replied, her voice steady. Greer's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Truth is a matter of perspective, Mrs. Harris, and in this town, mine carries more weight. Monica clenched her jaw, feeling the tremor of fear in her fingertips. But she met his stare, unblinking. When she left his office, She knew one thing for certain. This was a battle she had to see through to the end. Monica's determination sharpened over the next few days. With Sarah and Janet's help, she started documenting every interaction with Greer. Emails, memos, and witness testimonies were carefully compiled. Each piece of evidence felt like a shield against the oppressive force he wielded over the school. During a particularly tense faculty meeting, Monica took a calculated risk. When Greer disparaged her teaching methods yet again, she spoke up. "Principal Greer, student engagement has risen noticeably since I implemented these changes," she said, holding his gaze. "I have the data to support this." The room fell silent. Greer's face hardened, and he leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "We'll discuss this later," he said, his tone a thinly veiled threat. But Monica didn't flinch. Instead, she felt the quiet support radiating from Sarah and Janet seated beside her. The battle lines were becoming clearer, and Monica was ready for whatever came next. Word spread among the staff, moving in quiet, cautious whispers. Teachers who had previously remained silent began to contribute their stories to Monica's growing case file. Each shared experience painted a broader picture of Greer's abuse of power. The dismissals, the gaslighting, the punitive measures against those who dared to challenge him. One afternoon, Monica found a sealed envelope in her mailbox. Inside was an anonymous letter detailing a similar experience from a teacher who had left the school years prior. The letter described Greer's threats, the way he manipulated evaluations, and how he silenced dissent through fear. Sarah read it over Monica's shoulder. "This is it," she said, her eyes wide. "This is the proof that his behavior is a pattern." Monica nodded, a sense of momentum building in her chest. "It's time to act." The following week, Monica submitted her documentation to the school board. The formal complaint was precise, backed by testimony and evidence that painted an irrefutable picture of harassment and discrimination. The board scheduled a review meeting for the following Wednesday. Greer's demeanor changed overnight. He stalked the halls with a renewed intensity, eyes darting to Monica whenever she passed. His smile, once an unsettling facade, had vanished entirely. "You think you're clever," he said one morning when he cornered her in the corridor, his voice low enough not to attract attention. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Monica stepped back, keeping her expression neutral. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Mr. Greer." A flicker of something dangerous crossed his face, but before he could reply, another teacher stepped into the hallway. The moment passed, but Monica knew she had to be more vigilant than ever. As the date of the board meeting approached, Greer attempted a last-ditch effort to discredit Monica. An anonymous memo circulated through the school, accusing her of fabricating complaints to cover her own incompetence. The timing was no coincidence, and it sent a ripple of uncertainty through some of the faculty. In the teacher's lounge, Sarah and Janet gathered with Monica, their expressions a mix of anger and worry. "He's trying to shake you before the meeting," Sarah said, folding her arms tightly. "Don't let him." "I won't," Monica replied, her voice resolute. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and she knew she had to address it head-on. The day before the meeting, Monica called a brief staff meeting of her own, inviting those who had shared their stories. They filled the small, stuffy lounge, exchanging nervous glances as she began to speak. "We've all experienced this in some way," Monica said. "And tomorrow I'll stand before the board, not just for myself, but for every one of you who has ever felt silenced." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Janet stepped forward, eyes bright with determination. "We're with you, Monica, all the way." The day of the meeting arrived with a sense of foreboding. Monica dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue suit that radiated professionalism and strength. Elijah walked her to the school board building, his presence a silent promise of support. Inside, the room was stark and cold, lined with long tables where the board members sat with their notes and unreadable expressions. Greer sat at the far end, flanked by his supporters. The chairperson, Richard Thompson, called the meeting to order. "Mrs. Harris, we understand you have a complaint regarding administrative conduct," Thompson said, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his voice. Monica stood, hands steady despite the nerves pulsing through her. "Yes, I do." and I have documentation to support my claims. The next hour was a blur of testimonies and questions. Sarah and Janet both spoke, their words steady as they recounted their own experiences. Monica presented her evidence methodically, each point chipping away at the board's initial doubt. Greer's expression darkened as the tide of the meeting shifted. When Monica finished, a hush fell over the room. Thompson glanced at Greer, who offered no rebuttal. "We'll deliberate and reach a decision within the week," Thompson said, his tone no longer dismissive. Monica exhaled, the weight in her chest finally easing as she took her seat. The days that followed were tense. Greer was conspicuously absent from the school, and rumors flew through the halls. The teachers who had supported Monica were cautious but hopeful. Even students began to notice the change. Whispers of, "Did you hear about Principal Greer?" circulating in quiet corners. On Thursday afternoon, an official email from the board arrived in Monica's inbox. The subject line read, "Outcome of Administrative Conduct Review." Her heart pounded as she clicked it open. The board had concluded that there was sufficient evidence to place Greer on immediate administrative leave pending further investigation. His power was finally being stripped away. The news spread like wildfire. For the first time in years, Riverside High felt lighter. The teachers who had been too afraid to speak began to share their own relief with one another. Even students sensed the shift, their voices louder and more joyful as they passed through the halls. Monica's victory was met with a wave of mixed reactions. Support came from many, but there were those in the community who viewed her actions as an attack on their beloved institution. Letters poured in, some anonymous, questioning her motives. Others, however, praised her courage, detailing their own struggles with local power dynamics. A week after the meeting, Monica received a visit from Dr. Chin. "The board is bringing in an interim principal while we complete our investigation," he said, his expression both weary and grateful. "Thank you for having the courage to come forward. You've done more than you know." Monica nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. This fight had been about more than just her. It had been for the students, the faculty, and the future of Riverside High. The interim principal, Miss Reynolds, was a stark contrast to Greer. She listened during meetings, encouraged collaboration, and supported Monica's new initiatives. The school started to feel like a place of learning rather than a battlefield. One afternoon, as Monica walked through the hallways, she noticed a group of students working on a mural. It was a project she had suggested months ago, but had been blocked by Greer. Now, bright colors and powerful quotes from diverse authors decorated the once bare walls. Jamal, the once silent student, approached her as she watched. "It's looking good, Mrs. Harris," he said, a rare smile breaking across his face. "It really is," Monica replied, warmth spreading through her chest. Just as the school seemed to settle into a new rhythm, news broke that Richard Thompson, a board member known for his close ties to Greer, was pushing to dismiss Monica's complaint as an overreaction. The community was once again on edge, and Monica knew she had to take action to prevent this setback. She reached out to Sarah and Janet, and together they planned a public forum to bring awareness to the wider community. They invited current and former teachers to speak, ensuring that everyone's voice would be heard. The auditorium was packed on the night of the event. Parents, students, and faculty filled the seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and determination. Janet took the stage first, her voice ringing out clearly as she recounted her experiences. Monica followed, sharing the journey that had brought her to this moment. The room held its breath as she spoke, the silence filled with solidarity. By the end, the audience erupted into applause. The tide had turned, and Monica felt the power of community bolstering her like never before. The board convened a final meeting to address the renewed public attention. This time, the room was full of witnesses, teachers, students, parents, and community members who had come to show their support. Richard Thompson tried to maintain control, but it was clear the momentum was against him. "Doctor?" Chin stood up, clearing his throat. "In light of recent events and testimonies, I move that we reassess the policies that allowed this situation to persist." The vote was unanimous. Greer's tenure was officially over, and with it, the stranglehold he had on the school. In the weeks that followed, Riverside High began to transform. Monica was invited to join a committee to create anti-discrimination policies and implement training programs for both staff and students. Ms. Reynolds supported these changes wholeheartedly, ushering in a new era of openness. Jamal excelled, becoming one of the top students in Monica's class. The mural he had worked on with his peers was completed and became a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to what could be achieved when voices were united. Elijah found his own voice strengthened by Monica's battle. He began advocating for community programs that connected the police department with local youth, using his position to bridge gaps and foster trust. Their home became a hub for discussions and plans, the once quiet dinners now filled with hope and collaboration. "You've done more than just change a school," Elijah said one evening as they sat together on the porch. "You've inspired an entire town." Monica smiled, leaning into him. "We've done it together." Janet, Sarah, and Monica met for coffee one Saturday morning, their conversation filled with laughter and relief. The fight had been long and hard, but it had brought them closer, creating bonds that would last beyond the walls of Riverside High. "It's funny," Sarah said, sipping her drink. "A year ago, I never thought we'd be sitting here talking about how Greer is just a bad memory." Monica's eyes sparkled. "And look at us now." The mentorship program Monica had proposed months before became a reality, welcoming young teachers who sought guidance and a supportive environment. The school's culture shifted, embracing diversity and collaboration. Ms. Reynolds organized a Cultural Awareness Week, featuring presentations, workshops, and activities that celebrated the school's varied backgrounds. Students and teachers alike participated, creating a new chapter in Riverside High's story, one where everyone belonged. A year after Greer's removal, Monica stood before a crowd in the school auditorium, presenting a proposal to expand the mentorship program to other schools in the district. The room was filled with familiar faces, colleagues, students, parents, and Elijah, whose eyes shone with pride. The meeting ended with a standing ovation, the sound filling the room with energy. As Monica stepped down, she caught sight of Jamal and his friends, their smiles wide. Change had come to Riverside High, not just through her fight, but through the collective effort of all those who had chosen to stand with her. And as the sun set on another day in the small town, Monica knew that their story was far from over. It was only the beginning of what could be achieved when courage met community and hope refused to be silenced. Monica stood at the podium of the newly appointed school board meeting, her hands steady but her heart racing. The board, now made up of diverse members who represented different parts of the community, was listening intently. Monica's proposal for implementing anti-harassment training was a key topic on the agenda. "Educators are at their best when they feel safe and supported," Monica began, her voice confident. "This training is not just about preventing future issues. It's about fostering an environment where teachers and students thrive without fear." The board members nodded, some taking notes. A new member, Dr. Patel, an education reform advocate, raised her hand. "Mrs. Harris, I think this initiative is not only timely, but necessary. I propose we vote to implement this program starting next semester." The motion passed with little resistance. Monica stepped down from the podium, catching Sarah's eye as she did. Sarah smiled, her expression full of pride. After the meeting, Dr. Chin approached Monica. "Your proposal will change the way this district operates," he said. "You should be proud." "I am," Monica replied, "but there's still so much more to do." The news of the board's decision spread quickly. Staff meetings were held to introduce the new training programs, which included workshops, seminars, and open forums for teachers to share their experiences and learn strategies for creating inclusive classrooms. The change was met with mixed reactions. "Some people are resistant," Janet confided in Monica after one workshop. "But they'll come around. They have to." Monica nodded, watching the hallway as students moved between classes. For the first time, she noticed how groups that had once kept to themselves were mingling, voices blending in a harmonious chaos that spoke of something new, a tentative, shared hope. Meanwhile, Sarah took the lead in organizing peer support groups, where teachers could share their struggles and successes. The first meeting was held in the library, and attendance far exceeded expectations. "I didn't realize how many people felt the way I did," a young teacher named Mrs. Ramirez admitted. "This feels like a new beginning." Not everyone was supportive of the rapid changes. Some parents voiced concerns at the PTA meetings, questioning whether focusing on cultural awareness and inclusivity would distract from academics. The loudest dissent came from a small but vocal group led by a parent named Mr. Langston, who had strong ties to the old school board. "We need to remember that Riverside's excellence came from maintaining our traditions," Langston said during a meeting. "We're losing that." Monica listened quietly, choosing her response carefully. "Excellence isn't about exclusion, Mr. Langston. It's about growth, innovation, and supporting every student's potential." The room murmured, and while Langston looked unconvinced, several parents nodded in agreement. After the meeting, a mother approached Monica. "My son Jamal told me you're the reason he's excited to come to school," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in him." One evening, Elijah returned home looking unusually pleased. He held up a flyer for an upcoming community event hosted by the police department. "Bridging the Gap," aimed at fostering better relationships between officers and residents. "I thought it was time I borrowed a page from your book," Elijah said with a grin. "If Riverside can change, so can the rest of the town." Monica hugged him tightly. Their individual fights were merging into a shared mission, one that extended beyond the school's walls. The event was a success. Families gathered at the park, mingling with officers who participated in activities and open discussions. Trust, once scarce, began to take root in small, meaningful moments. Monica watched as Jamal's family spoke with Elijah, laughter punctuating their conversation. For the first time in a long while, the town didn't feel divided by invisible lines. As spring turned into summer, Riverside High continued to evolve. The mentorship program Monica had proposed was up and running. New teachers were paired with experienced ones, creating a network of support that echoed throughout the school. Sarah took on a leadership role in coordinating these efforts, organizing monthly check-ins and gathering feedback. Janet, who had come back full-time, spearheaded a literary club that showcased works from various cultures. The club quickly became popular, with students discussing everything from African folk tales to modern Latin American poetry. The first school-wide event of the new academic year was Cultural Awareness Week. The halls were decorated with projects celebrating global traditions. Music played between classes, and students participated in workshops that explored their own identities. One afternoon, Monica walked past Jamal as he helped set up an exhibit. He glanced at her, a shy grin spreading across his face. "Thanks for pushing me to speak up," he said. "I didn't know I had it in me." "You always did, Jamal," Monica replied, a lump forming in her throat. "Sometimes you just need someone to remind you." That week ended with a celebration in the auditorium. The student-led performances were a mixture of dance, spoken word, and storytelling. As Monica watched her students on stage, their laughter and voices filling the space, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This was what she had fought for, a place where every student could feel seen and valued. As Cultural Awareness Week wrapped up, Monica reflected on how far Riverside High had come. The air buzzed with a newfound energy. Teachers were collaborating more, and the students carried themselves with pride. Monica's mentorship program had reached more teachers than expected, spreading the idea that support was not just a luxury, but a necessity. One morning, as she prepared her lesson plan, Mrs. Reynolds entered the classroom with a warm smile. "You've done incredible work, Monica," she said. "I'm recommending we expand your mentorship program district-wide." Monica's breath caught. Expanding the program would mean more teachers could benefit from the supportive environment she had fought to create. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds," Monica said, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds replied. "This is just the beginning." Janet's return to a full-time teaching role brought more than just another skilled educator. It brought history and resilience. She infused her AP literature class with stories of overcoming barriers, fostering discussions that stretched beyond the syllabus. During one of her classes, Janet invited Monica to join a debate session. The topic was the importance of challenging societal norms through literature. Jamal raised his hand, and Monica watched with pride as he eloquently argued how voices from different backgrounds enriched the collective understanding of justice and morality. "That's what this place needed," Janet said to Monica after class. A spark to remind them that change isn't just necessary, it's powerful. Word finally arrived. Greer's trial would take place within the month. Monica received a subpoena to testify, as did Janet and Sarah. The news rippled through Riverside, reopening wounds but also reinforcing the importance of accountability. On the day of the trial, Monica walked into the courthouse, her nerves tempered by the steadying presence of Elijah by her side. Greer sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller and more hollow than she remembered. "Mrs. Harris," the lawyer for the prosecution began, "can you tell the court about the incidents that led to this investigation?" Monica spoke clearly, recounting months of harassment and intimidation. The courtroom was silent, each word amplifying the gravity of what had been allowed to continue unchecked for so long. Janet followed with her testimony, detailing Greer's long history of abusive power. The weight of their words was palpable. Greer's lawyer attempted to discredit them, but the evidence was overwhelming. Monica's carefully compiled documents, combined with the testimonies of other teachers and former staff, painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. After several days, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of harassment and misconduct. The sentence included a ban from working in educational institutions and a public statement acknowledging the harm he had caused. As they left the courthouse, Monica felt the first real taste of closure. It was a victory not just for her, but for every teacher who had been silenced, and every student who deserved better. In the weeks following the trial, Riverside High's transformation picked up speed. The victory brought with it a renewed sense of purpose. Monica often found herself staying late to meet with new teachers or coordinate future mentorship events. The school was buzzing with plans, and a spirit of optimism touched everything. One afternoon, Monica sat with Sarah and Janet in the library, their favorite meeting spot. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over the room. "Remember when we thought nothing would change?" Sarah said, a note of disbelief in her voice. Janet chuckled, shaking her head. "I remember, and now look at us. We're part of something bigger than we ever imagined." Monica smiled, looking out at the courtyard where students laughed and debated. The mural they had painted shone in the sunlight, a symbol of unity and resilience. "It's because we stood together," she said softly, "and we're just getting started." Elijah's community policing project had started to take root, and he saw firsthand how conversations and trust building were reshaping the town's relationship with law enforcement. He hosted forums at local community centers where residents voiced their concerns and officers listened without judgment. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Elijah shared a story from a recent event. "A young man came up to me today and said he never thought he'd see the police and community working together. He told me it made him feel safer." Monica's eyes welled up. "That's why we do what we do, isn't it?" Elijah nodded. For moments like that, their shared victories, both in and out of school, were transforming Riverside into a place they could proudly call home. A year had passed since the trial, and the mentorship program had grown, spreading to neighboring schools. Monica was invited to speak at a state educators' conference, where she shared her experiences and the impact of collective action on a school's culture. Standing on the stage, Monica looked out at the sea of educators, some of whom nodded, understanding etched on their faces. "Change doesn't come from one voice alone," she said. "It comes from all of us deciding that enough is enough and choosing to stand together." The applause was thunderous, and for a moment, Monica allowed herself to bask in the knowledge that her story was now part of something much larger. Back at Riverside High, the new culture of support paid dividends. Jamal, once the quiet student in the back row, won a statewide essay contest with a piece titled "Finding My Voice." He credited Monica and Janet in his acceptance speech, speaking confidently in front of an audience for the first time. "It's not just about one person helping you," Jamal said, glancing at Monica and Janet in the crowd. "It's about all the people who stand by you when you're trying to find your way." Tears pricked Monica's eyes, and she felt the profound truth of his words settle into her heart. With the old board dissolved, new elections brought in fresh faces committed to transparency and fairness. Dr. Chin, now chairperson, pushed for policies that protected teachers and students from future misconduct. Monica was invited to advise on these new policies, further cementing her role as an agent of change. Meetings were no longer exercises in power plays, but discussions that invited collaboration. The school board became a body that actively listened to the community it served, ensuring that the darkness of Greer's legacy would not return. The town of Riverside felt different. Parents who had once viewed the school with suspicion now volunteered for school events. Students' voices were amplified in meetings, shaping programs that reflected their interests and cultures. The mural in the hallway became a gathering spot, a place where stories and laughter intertwined. One day, as Monica walked past the mural, she noticed a new addition, a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., painted in bold letters. "The time is always right to do what is right." She smiled, knowing how true those words had become for their community. The search for a permanent principal ended with the appointment of Dr. Allen, an educator known for her emphasis on teacher autonomy and student engagement. Dr. Allen's first staff meeting set the tone for her leadership. "We are here to build on the strong foundation that has been laid by people who believe in this school," she said, looking directly at Monica. "And we will move forward together." The teachers exchanged glances, smiles breaking out as the room filled with hope. The mentorship program was officially district-wide. Young teachers who had once struggled with isolation found solace in shared experiences and guidance. Sarah led training sessions, and Janet continued her literary club, which now attracted students from all over the town. Monica watched the program grow, its reach extending to schools that had never seen such initiatives. It was a testament to what could be achieved when people refused to let fear silence them. The second annual Cultural Awareness Week was even grander than the first. Students showcased their family histories, sharing stories and artifacts that enriched the understanding of everyone present. Workshops on global music, dance, and storytelling brought together parents, students, and teachers. As Monica moved through the bustling halls, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Jamal with a group of students, each holding an instrument. "We're performing at the assembly today," he said, excitement lighting up his face. "I wouldn't miss it," Monica said, pride swelling in her chest. At the assembly, Jamal and his group played a fusion of traditional and modern music, drawing cheers and applause. As the final notes faded, Janet took the stage, introducing Monica as the school's guiding voice. "It takes more than courage to create lasting change," Janet said. "It takes resilience and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. And Monica Harris has shown us all what that means." Monica stepped forward, her heart full as the room erupted into applause. This was not just her moment. It belonged to everyone who had fought for a better Riverside. Monica's mentorship model was adopted by the state as a pilot program. She found herself traveling to other districts, sharing the steps Riverside had taken to create a nurturing, respectful educational environment. The ripples of change were spreading, touching communities that had long felt forgotten. During one of these trips, she met teachers who recounted their own stories of struggle and perseverance. "Your story gave us the courage to stand up," one young teacher said, tears in her eyes. Monica felt a deep connection to them, knowing the fight was far from over, but that they were not alone. A year to the day after Greer's departure, Monica stood before the newly elected school board, presenting a proposal for a statewide mentorship conference. The room buzzed with excitement, and Elijah sat in the audience, his supportive smile grounding her. When the proposal was approved, Monica stepped outside into the warm afternoon sun. Elijah joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about what it took to get here?" he asked. Monica looked back at the school, now alive with the sounds of a thriving community. "Every day," she said. "But it was worth it." Elijah kissed her temple. "You didn't just fight for yourself, Monica. You fought for everyone who needed a voice." She smiled, eyes brimming with tears. "And now it's up to us to keep going." As they stood together, watching students laugh and run across the courtyard, Monica knew this was only the beginning. Riverside High was not just a school transformed, it was a testament to what could be achieved when people chose to stand together, unyielding in the face of adversity. And as the sun set on that day, Monica Harris knew that true change was not just a moment, but a movement, one that would inspire generations to come.